What's up, guys? I'm Alex with BFE Adventures, and today I'm going to tell you whether or not you should buy a Pan America. Stay tuned. Hey guys, welcome back. It has been a while for me. As you can tell, the background, if you've seen any of my other videos, the background has changed a little bit. I built a house last year, and so I was completely out of commission while we were doing that. And so now here we are in the new garage, and I'm gonna tell you about some changes. One of them is that we added a Pan America to the stable. And if you guys know me or seen any of my other videos, you know I've owned a lot of ADV bikes, and I love giving people my overall thoughts and reviews on them. So today we're going to talk about whether or not you should buy a Pan America. And a few big key points to state is they are known to have a few reliability issues. They're known to have a good motor. And this was Harley's first segment in our first offering into the ADV segment. And so what I like to do, instead of reading off a spec sheet, I like to give you more of the visceral feel of the bike and then compare it to a few others in its class that I've owned or ridden, and just give you the overall feel for the bike, because in my opinion, that matters more than what the spec sheet shows. So here we got this big old girl here, and I'll give you my original reasoning for getting it. I was, at the time, my biggest bike I had was the 690. And I was just burning off dual sport tires, commuting to work on it and stuff like that, outside of, you know, riding off-road on the weekends. And I just wanted something that was a little more roadworthy, something that I could, you know, throw stuff on the back and take to the office. And so that is why I decided to look at something bigger. This happened to be a good deal that popped up around here, and I decided to try it. So this is a 2022 Pan America Special. And first, I'll just give you the overall thoughts on it. So one, it is big and heavy. It's a big and heavy adventure bike, but that's no different than any of the other big and heavy adventure bikes. It feels like a tank compared to my 690, but the power is incredible. So this is roughly around 150 horsepower, and it feels like it. This motor is a blast to ride. This bike is a rocket ship. I would compare it to like a 1290, 1190. Honestly, it feels almost as fast as one of those. I think the 1190 feels more raw. This feels about the same amount of power as an 1190, but the 1190 being a little lighter and just the way it's set up, this is a little more comfy, and the 1190 is a little more sharp, and it's just a little more raw and aggressive. But otherwise, this bike is a blast to ride. So just telling my overarching thoughts. I've now had this bike for 5-6 months, and so I'm out of the honeymoon phase with it, so I can tell you more appropriate my thoughts. And I absolutely love this bike. And honestly, I laughed at it whenever it came out. I've laughed at the reviews about it, and I just thought, you know, this was not gonna even almost compare to a big adventure bike. And one thing I've learned over the years is people originally, like, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, maybe even a little longer than that, people were buying these big bikes after watching Long Way Round and Long Way Down and whatnot, or yeah, Long Way Down. Anyway, and they saw, you know, Ewan and Charlie taking these big BMWs out in the middle of nowhere. And so everybody jumped into the segment with these big bikes. And the natural progression that I've seen in most people is then they slowly get smaller and smaller bikes because they realize that the off-road riding is fun, and they don't want to have to worry about picking these big pigs up off-road all the time. And so we've slowly shifted more towards a middleweight as like the primary hardcore ADV guys, or even like smaller bikes than middleweights. And so you have to know what this bike is really designed for. Like, it is technically an adventure bike, but can this do single track? Sure. Do you want to do that compared to a 690 or a 450 dual sport? Absolutely not. This is a pig. But if you want to rip a gravel road, you want to rip the highway, you want to rail some twisties, and the most aggressive thing you're going to do off-road is a Jeep trail or a side-by-side trail maybe that's not rutted up, this is more than sufficient. This bike I've had a bunch of them, and I've had a bunch of way more off-road worthy bikes. And I would compare this honestly to about my BMW GS 1200. It is capable off-road. It's more capable than you would expect when you get on it and feel it. The weight ride's really low. It feels really light when you're moving, which is what all these big bikes are good at. And off-road, the bike is honestly better than I expected. It's got a bunch of different ride modes. It's virtually unrideable in any other mode than off-road mode when you're off-road. So I learned that the hard way. I was going down a paved road that turned into gravel, and I was in sport mode, and I just hit the gravel at like 50 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour, and it felt like I was on marbles. And so very quickly I switched it over to off-road mode. It immediately smoothed out, and it just cruised right down the road. So the bike is incredible in its ability to switch modes. It's really good. So overall, the bike is a good package if you know what you're getting into. If you're trying to be a hardcore ADV off-road guy and trying to take this there, you would have to be highly skilled to do that. So keep that in mind. If you're looking for something that you want to cruise on the weekends and occasionally you want to take a dirt road, or there's a field road to get to somewhere, this will more than happily take you there. Now, the overall visceral feel of the bike, it is everything I've wanted in a big bike, to be honest with you. My heart still it lusts for the 1290, but overall, I've always, down the road, I wanted a Harley. I like the sound of a Harley. I like that overarching feel of sitting on a Harley. And this does that. It gives you that, classic Harley sound. Definitely sounds a little more tuned up than a classic Harley, but you get all the visceral sounds and feelings of a Harley, but all of the benefits of an adventure bike and all of the benefits of modern performance. Like, let's be honest, if you guys have ridden any Harleys pre, let's say 2015, they aren't very fast, let's be honest. But once they got into like the 114s or 117s, like those motors can haul the mail. And this 1250 Revo Max, Rev Max, I know I'm mispronouncing that or whatever it is, it's a monster. It is an absolute monster. This thing rips. And when you're in sport mode with traction control off, it is exciting to ride. Also with sport mode, the suspension is very stiff, which is great for hitting corners. It's very well mannered for what it is. Now, a couple other pros while I'm talking about the visceral feeling. The bike is extremely comfortable. The windscreen is super easily adjustable with this little pinch deal here. You just grab it and slide the windscreen up and down. It's very handy, comes standard with cruise control, heated grips, all the stuff that you want from a big, comfy adventure bike. The dash is a little small as far as what's on it. I'm only 34, so I can still read it, but come to the time that I'm gonna need some cheaters, it would be very hard to read that dash. So, if you're getting up in your 40s, 50s, you might have difficulty reading some of the dash, but it does show a lot of great information on it. The cruise control works very well, and there's certain, it's got a bunch of pages so you can monitor different parts of the bike while you're riding. It does also come with standard navigation. That is useless. You got to get the Harley app on your phone, put the navigation points in, and then, it kind of Bluetooths to there, but if there's ever any changes in your route, it doesn't update right. It's just useless. So the navigation, in my opinion, it doesn't matter. I'm going to use my Garmin anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Other things about the bike, I've left it pretty much stock other than I put a beefier skid plate on it, and I put an aftermarket exhaust on it because I wanted to hear the Harley sound, and it's incredible. I will give a shout out to Tosi Performance. That's who did my pipe. I had an issue when I was trying to actually put a decibel killer in it. It was a little too loud for me, and I ended up pulling all the packing out, and they took care of me. They took the pipe back, repacked it for me, sent it back looking brand new, and I could not be happier with them. So shout out to them. Okay, now let's move on to the cons of the Pan America. The biggest one that people have a problem with that causes big problems is the fuel tank or fuel filter. So for some reason, these tanks were not coated from the factory. I'm just paraphrasing here. And basically the fuel filter gets clogged and it can cause all kinds of issues. And that's a super common problem in the 21 through 23s. In 24, they started coating the tanks. And so that shouldn't be a problem anymore. Now, that being said, with certain things in place, you can, get the right filter or get a spare filter or swap it preemptively. Just take care of your gas tank and it shouldn't be a problem or as big of a problem. Another big problem that these things have is electrical gremlins. And the biggest part of that is this little battery that hides up here. It's made for a little Sportster, and that battery is not near strong enough to run all of the electronics on this bike and start it. So I've noticed even if I don't let the whole startup sequence happen and the fuel pump fire up and like give the dash time to square up and get everything appropriate, there ends up being issues like the bike doesn't want to start or it'll throw random codes. There's just a bunch of weird issues that will happen. The other thing is I would say there's like a short somewhere that's just slowly draining the battery on this, but it's too common amongst everyone. So I know it's not just my bike, but this thing I have to leave on a tender like in the winter time for sure when it's cold out. If this is going to sit longer than 3 days, I have to put a battery tender on it or it won't start whenever I come back out. And that's not a good thing when, you're going on an adventure and let's say you camp at a high altitude and it's cold at night. I would be genuinely concerned on whether or not this bike is going to start the next morning. That's not a problem in the 24 pluses. They put a new wiring harness and a new battery in, so that should be an issue of the past. But just know in these bikes, that is something to pay attention to. And that's my biggest issue with it. If you're going to go on multi-day rides away from home and you're going to be somewhere cold, that would concern me. The other thing about it electrically is the right hand switch is known to go out in them. It seems to be pretty random and it affects a handful of them, not all of them. But most of the time, any issues with the bike, I will say they seem to be found in the first 5,000 miles. Most of the forums and everything that I've read about them as I've gone through ownership with them, most of these bikes have those issues, the fuel filter issue, the hand control issue. Most of those happen in the first 5,000 miles. So one thing I can say, like this bike's got 13 on it now already, but if you are looking in the used market, if you buy a bike honestly from a stand-up person that has taken care of it and it's got 10,000 miles on it, chances are they've already worked out all those gremlins. So you should be pretty confident that the bike's going to treat you well. And that's just something I would say is if you're buying a used one. If you buy a used one that's got 2,000 miles on it, that's a crapshoot. And so I don't know if you should buy that one. Now, the other thing I'll say to finish up with those cons, those seem to be the biggest cons. Other than that, I've seen plenty of people with 30,000 miles on them, 50,000 miles on them, and there's not any crazy issues like, the KTM cam eating issues. There's no like crazy catastrophic issues that I've seen with these bikes. Primarily, it's electrical gremlins. That's like the biggest one. And yes, it's a pain in the butt, but if you're that worried about it, buy an extra right-hand control switch. I don't know, it'd probably be a couple $100, but if you're that worried about it, buy it and put it in your garage and swap it out when it goes out. Other than that, the issues with them are, in my opinion, pretty minor. However, they seem to be frequent enough that if this is your only bike and you're using this as your only reliable form of transportation or your only reliable form of going for weeks on end to Alaska, I don't know if I would do that. So that's my honest opinion. For me, I'm only riding 3-4 day trips at a time. Most of the time they're a couple 100-mile treks during the day. I'm not going away from home thousands of miles. Most of the time we're trailering to Arkansas or Tennessee, or we're gonna trailer to Colorado just to have more stuff with us. And then we're only going on multiple 100-mile trips a day, not 1,000 miles trips, you know? So if that sounds more like how you're gonna ride, this bike is freaking incredible. The other thing I'll say is this is not my only bike. I have some other ones over here that you can't see off camera. So it's not my only bike. So if something were to happen or something go down, it's not a big deal for me. I'd ride a different bike. So if you're looking for something exciting, something that's a big bike to be comfy and cruise on, and you're looking for something that gives you the Harley feel, but all the ADV perks of better suspension and comfortable seating position, this is an incredible bike. So that's my overarching thoughts. Should you buy it? If you fall in one of those categories, absolutely. This bike is a riot, and it's honestly one of my favorite bikes I've ever owned. It's just, it has so much character and it's so much fun. Now, let's compare it to a couple other the big bikes in the ADV segment. So first one, we'll talk about my most recent big bike that I've had, and that was the Africa Twin. Off-road, there's no comparison. The Africa Twin felt way more like a dirt bike. It was still a big adventure bike, but I had no issues taking my Africa Twin places that with my BMW, I would have thought twice about. The Africa Twin I would take on single track and not really be worried about it. This, I would not do that if I was alone. If I had other people to help me pick it up, sure, but alone, I wouldn't do it. So that's kind of where it would fall with that. With the GS, it's very comparable, honestly. It definitely feels a lot faster. I've not drag raced a BMW, but I'm willing to bet this is faster. It sure feels like it. And even if it's not faster, it feels like it, and that's what's most important. So on road, the GS was better in the corners. This is a little more lazy. The BMW was more sharp. The front cantilever suspension was better. It didn't dive when you hit the brakes. So on road, if you're riding corners aggressively, BMW is better. Comfort wise, honestly, they're pretty comparable. I mean, I had a Sergeant seat on my GS, so I can say it was more comfy, but this has cruise control. My GS was the previous generation before cruise control. All the new ones have it. So overall, it is very comparable to the type of riding I would do with a GS, and this is more exciting to me. So that's how I would compare it. Compared to something like the 1290 or 1190, those bikes are way more sharp feeling. They're very sharp. That's just the best way I can describe it. If you see my 690 video comparing it to other 650 class bikes, same exact thing. The suspension's better, the steering is sharper, but honestly, the 1290 feels kind of vanilla compared to this. I know the 1290 is faster for sure, but this feels faster. It's just more fun. Kind of like, honestly, I think the 1190 is more fun to ride than the 1290, and the 1190 is slower, but it feels faster, if that makes sense. So if you're looking for upper echelon, hyper speed, and better off-road, then honestly, I'd pick the 1290 over this guy. Comparing it to middleweight class bikes, I'm not even gonna do that because it's really not comparable. They're better off-road. All the middleweight bikes are better off-road, hands down, no comparison. I don't know a single middleweight bike that I would say is worse, or is, yeah, worse off-road than this. Maybe the old Tigers 800s, they're definitely more street bike, but that's the only one I would put in that category. Other big bikes, I think I'm blanking. Comparing this to like my Super Tenere. Honestly, this is very reminiscent of my seating position on my Tenere. It feels about the same. The height feels about the same. This has like the auto lowering suspension, which could be a reliability issue, but I've not really heard of those going out on this, but the bike does lower, I think 1.5 inches or 2 inches when you come to a stop. That's honestly unbelievably handy. And I'm vertically challenged, so I'm only 5'10" on a good day, and it is wonderful to be able to flat foot both sides whenever I come to a stop, or even if I'm sitting on a hill or something like that. It's just really handy. But anyway, it feels very much like my Super Tenere, but it is definitely more off-road capable, and it is definitely more exciting than the Super Tenere. So that's where I'd compare it to that guy. I think that's pretty much it as far as big bikes that I can compare it to. overarching, I hope that gives you a good idea of how this bike feels and how it performs. And honestly, I look to keeping this for a little while. I really enjoy this bike. As you guys know, I swap bikes all the time, and this one is just too much fun for me to want to get rid of right now. So at the time, I think I'll keep her for a little bit. But if you guys have any questions, throw them in the comments below. I'm finally back and ready to comment on stuff and get back to interacting with you guys. So till next time, take it easy, and I'll give you more of an in-depth riding review of this guy in the future. But take care.